He's been researching the historic schoolhouses of Washington County for 4 years, Washington County native, and is currently a freshman at Smithsburg High School. His long-term plan, I hope this is still accurate, is to find a great college where he can study historic preservation. So you see that he is one of us. And we're very, very pleased to have him here tonight. This evening's presentation will encompass the history and lore surrounding several of Washington County's particularly storied bygone schoolhouses, as well as the unique research process used to find and document them. And I will also point out that we can show and tell here, print out some information and a little bit to look at when the lecture is over. I'm sure Henry can answer any of your questions about those things. Don't forget that Monday the 7th of April will be another McCauley lecture. We'll be having a short film about Folsom's Chapel. Not really about the chapel, but about one of the women who left behind a diary of her time living in Sharpsburg while the Battle of Antietam was going on. She was an African-American woman who lived in Sharpsburg with her husband. And the film takes entries from the diary, and a woman who is an actor is in the film, portrays this character. So it should be very interesting, and that'll be on the 7th. And also, coming up for Noteworthy Sundays, I don't know how many of you know about these, but they're pretty wonderful musical events that happen right here. On April 13th will be that typeface, Daryl Brenzel, classical jazz, and on May 11th, classic flamenco. So you want to come to that. It should be a rousing Sunday. And some of these little cards will be on the table back there. Now, I'm gonna go to Henry. Take it away.
Okay.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. And hello, everybody. I'm very glad to be here tonight, and I thank you all for coming. I'm Henry Recker, and tonight I will be highlighting some of the most interesting public schoolhouses in Washington County. I gave my first presentation on this topic about 2 years ago at the Washington County Historical Society. And I had another talk last October for the Smithsburg Historical Society. So this will be my third presentation on the topic of our county's old schoolhouses. And if I keep going at this rate, I'll be delivering this speech once a year for the rest of my life. Now, I'd first like to thank those at the Western Maryland Group for inviting me to speak here tonight. I always love coming here and looking through all of the files. This place truly does have some of the best, most amazing resources in the county. And just a little bit more about myself. I'm 15 years old and was born here in Hagerstown. I now live in Smithsburg, and I'm a freshman at Smithsburg High. I love traveling and especially observing architecture, history, and natural beauty across the country. Here I am at an abandoned coal company store in southern West Virginia. So far, I've been to over 30 states, and I hope to get to more of them and maybe travel internationally later on in my high school career. Now, I've researched the topic of historic schoolhouses in our county since the age of 10 in 2012. I'm very interested in architectural history and historic preservation, especially local history. I plan on attending college to study something in the realm of historic preservation and urban planning. My research has taken me to every nook and cranny of our county, and I believe that I've really been able to gain an appreciation for the unique culture of our area. From the Blue Ridge Mountains in the east, the vacation communities of Penn Mar, to the Cumberland Valley, the Sino Canal, and the Appalachian Mountains in the west, I really think that Washington County is unlike any other. I'd also like to recognize the countless locals who have been so willing to provide helpful information to me. And lastly, I'd like to recognize my parents who are here tonight, Steve and Julie Recker, as without their help, this research would not be possible. Now, Washington County's last one-room schoolhouse closed in 1955, and our last two-room schoolhouse closed in 1970. Throughout my research, I found that approximately 300 school buildings have stood in this county over the course of history. And today, about 110 former schoolhouses remain. I'm writing a book on the schoolhouses of our county, and I hope to complete it by the time I graduate high school. Now, y'all came here to hear about schoolhouses, so let's get into it. However, please save any questions for the end of the presentation. And without further ado, I'd like to start from the top here, at the very beginning of our county's history. The first recorded school to be formally established in the county was not in Hagerstown, but actually in the Boonesboro district. In 1776, a year that marked the creation of both our county and our nation, a man by the name of Reverend Bartholomew Booth formed Delamere Academy, named for British Lord Delamere, at a location now known as Devil's Backbone. Booth graduated from Oxford in 1754 and moved to America 10 years later. Now, he lived in many places around Maryland before coming to Washington County, and through a grant, he received the 1,700 acres of land that he would name Delamere. There, on a prominent rise overlooking Indian Creek, he built a house where he would hold his academy. This was a humble building, 2 stories at most, only holding 2 rooms, and built with only logs and bricks. The school he held was an all-boys institution, and 2 of the perhaps most spectacular boys taught there were the sons of Benedict Arnold, as well as Chief Justice Washington of the Supreme Court, who was George Washington's nephew. The letter in which Benedict Arnold entrusts his sons to the school has been an heirloom in the Booth family for centuries now. An interesting aspect about this academy was that textbooks used in the school were imported from Europe, as formal education was not yet commonplace in the United States, and they were not being produced here yet. Also, they were mostly in Latin. Reverend Booth died as a very respected educator in 1785, and the Delamere property ultimately remained in the Booth family for over 150 years. Remarkably, the original school building from the 1770s still stands today. It's since been encased in brick and incorporated into this much larger and statelier structure. But that original building still remains underneath the numerous additions. This is on Prince Road, beyond the kayak rental place at Devil's Backbone. Now, moving on from Delamere, I'd like to recognize another one of our county's earliest schoolhouses that still stands today. A man by the name of Ludwig Hewitt purchased 2 tracts of land from none other than Jonathan Hager in 1769. He purchased 2 other properties and eventually patented his estate in the Cape Town district as Hewitt's Meadows. A plantation named the Willows would be constructed on this land, as well as a property known as the Maples, which both contain grand mansions that still stand today. The Hewitt's Meadows Schoolhouse was constructed on the Maples section of the property, and the school building reflects architecture seen elsewhere on the Maples, which is entirely listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The schoolhouse, which was also known simply as Hewitt's Schoolhouse, is believed to have been built around the year 1800 by stonecutters who were German immigrants. I actually don't think that it was originally built to serve as a school, and I suspect that it was likely a home at first. This photo here is from the 1970s, when it had been closed as a school for almost a century and was being used as a dwelling. Now, little is known about its time as a school, but it first appeared as a schoolhouse on an 1859 map. It's on the north side of Chooseville Road, just off of Route 66. Here in this newspaper article from 1871, it can be seen that multiple teachers from the Cape Town district had met at the schoolhouse to discuss methods of teaching. In the bottom right corner, I hope you all can see that a man by the name of Reverend Joseph W. Santee was president of the organization. His son, Reverend Charles Santee, also taught at Hewitt's before entering the ministry. Now, this is unfortunately the only newspaper record I have of the school. Today, I think that it's really interesting to see what was newsworthy back then. Ultimately, Hewitt's Schoolhouse closed in 1885, and the Hewitt family facilitated the construction of a new community schoolhouse in nearby Pondsville. Now let's get back to the original school building itself. This is what Hewitt Schoolhouse looks like today. Unfortunately, it sits abandoned, and I estimate it's been empty since about the late 1990s. Reportedly, its last inhabitants won the lottery and moved elsewhere without coming back. The current owner has no plans for restoration or renovation that I'm aware of. I've only been able to get in contact with his family. Someone mows the lawn growing around it though, and used to cut back the weeds growing by it. However, today in the summertime, you can't even see the side of the building because of how tall the weeds are that are growing up against it. Now, some of you may have noticed how close that far left corner of the building is to the road. Precariously, that distance now measures less than 2 feet, but it's been sat there over 200 years, and nothing has hit that corner. Now, taking a peek inside, it can firstly be seen on the right here that something did crash into the building at one point, but not on the corner. It might be a little hard to see, but that is a bathtub on the bottom right with stones in it. The house was a 6-room residence with 2 bedrooms, a common room, a bathroom, as well as a kitchen and eating space. I have observed that this general layout was very common among one-room schoolhouse conversions. Also, the stone walls of this building are said to be almost 2 feet thick at the base. This next room spans the width of the building and contains that ginormous old stone hearth. You can really see here how this was never more than a vernacular building. The woodwork is beautiful, but not ornate. Not pictured in these images, there is truly a gaping hole in the kitchen floor, which leads to an actual basement beneath the structure, with old growth pine beams holding up the floor above. The hole is not there because of any damage though, as it's actually where a trapdoor would have been. And on the top right here, you can see a few steps beneath that window. Behind that door, which is almost flush with the wall, there's a winding staircase leading up to the attic. Now, remember how I said those people won the lottery?
Wow.
I suspect that these were all of their belongings. This is the attic, and I'm surprised to not see any large old beams up here, but there were mice. And on that far wall, you can see exposed stone, and that window opening is almost large enough for a door. I really wonder what this room would have been in the past. The Hewitt's Meadow School was originally in the Cave Town district, and it's especially interesting to me because it's so close to where I live. I've actually walked to it multiple times. It's only a mile away from my house. Now, the Cave Town School itself is truly like no other in the county. Anteceding at least 2 previous schoolhouses in the village of Cave Town, this architecturally stunning building was constructed in 1894 at a cost of $2,000, which is roughly $75,000 today. Unfortunately, I don't know the architect behind its design, but I do know the 2 contractors who oversaw its construction, and that they were paid a total of $850 for contracting. Now, this school building was very much needed for the Cave Town community, as it can be seen in an earlier state report that teacher John Kelly was once handling 103 pupils by himself in an earlier Cave Town schoolhouse. Here's a later picture of the school from a different angle. The architectural detail was consistent throughout the entire exterior of the building. The Cave Town Schoolhouse closed in 1948, and it was sold at auction the following year. It was eventually converted into apartments, and still stands today. Unfortunately, much of its architectural and historical integrity has been lost. Despite this, all of its original siding and much of its original wooden fenestration remains, as well as some original brickwork. I don't know where the bell tower went, but I know that it was removed. However, I don't know if any of it was kept somewhere, especially the bell. A separate story that I find interesting is that the school bell at Smithsburg, which is completely unrelated to this, was taken to a church in West Virginia after the school closed. But nobody actually knew this. And when their modern-day high school was being constructed, they wanted to honor the school bell. So it was tracked down and incorporated into the new building. If only we knew where the Cave Town school bell went. Now, on the tower there, you may have noticed a date stone in the brick wall, which is still there today. And here it is up close. Also notice how there was a plant growing out of the rain gutter to the left. And now I'm sure all of you saw how beautiful and unique the design of the caved down schoolhouse was. And there was actually another schoolhouse in the county, designed by that same unknown architect. Highfield is a small community that is now mostly considered a part of Cascade, up by Fort Ritchie. I've spent a lot of time up in that area, and I just love it. Although this stunning schoolhouse was constructed in 1894, 30 years before the fort, many say that this building reminds them of architecture seen at Fort Ritchie. The Highfield Schoolhouse here was constructed primarily of Catoctin greenstone, a beautiful type of rock exclusive to those mountains. You can see how the rock was completely uncourse, almost like stacked rubble. Everything about the Highfield Schoolhouse was truly unique, and it still stands today, but it underwent a renovation similar to that of the Cape Town School. I'm not sure exactly when the school closed, nor do I know when someone stripped this building of its original beauty, but I do know that it's almost completely unrecognizable today. From the road, one would never know that this was the same building, or even once a school. Similarly to the Cave Town School, I don't know if any of its original fenestration was salvaged because of how much was removed. Now, I'm not sure why it was just Cave Town and Highfield that were graced with these especially unique buildings in 1894. But now I'd like to go to a schoolhouse located on the far opposite side of Washington County. The Denali Schoolhouse was constructed in 1917 to consolidate two one-room schoolhouses out in the orchard land west of Hancock. I really didn't know much about this school until I visited the Hancock Historical Society 2 years ago, where they had copies of a book simply titled Denali School. Published in 2014 and written by Donald Corbett. This book has been very inspirational to me, as it's a very thorough oral history, documenting multiple students and teachers' times at the mountaintop schoolhouse. It was situated on a ridge, shrouded in forest. Many students recalled the beautiful candlelight programs held at the school in the nighttime. Francis Moore, a former student, recalled, "As a child, I was enchanted by the shadows cast on the walls by the light of the lanterns. They gave a much brighter light than ordinary lanterns." The children there put on many plays and musical programs too. Another former student, Della Peck, recalled many things about her time there. I found her memories to be particularly interesting. She said, "We all knew each other so well at Tenalloway that we even knew everyone's birthday. Birthdays were a big event, with singing happy birthday and a birthday paddling. One snack for each year, plus one to grow on. I was going to be 9 years old on January 10th, which meant 10 snacks. On January 9th, everyone told me that they could hardly wait until the next day. I was really going to get it. The year was 1939, and we had just moved to the Orchard House at the intersection of Round Top and Camp Hill Roads. Because it would have been my birthday, I had told everyone that I would not be at school the next day because of the promised paddlings. Sometime during the night, our parents woke us up and told us to look at the fire in the woods right up the hill from our house. We were devastated to find that not only were the woods on fire, but that the school had burned to the ground. I had taken a Christmas book, Heidi, to the school to read during recess when the weather was too bad to go outside. We had just been introduced to music, and everyone had purchased tonettes. The instruments had been delivered to the school just a few days prior. As we watched the fire, we knew that nothing could be saved. The next day, some of our friends came to go sled riding. They all said that I had burnt the schoolhouse down, so I would not have to go to school. I thought they meant it. I had nightmares about the fire for months. My sisters and I were terrified about what would happen to us as far as our education was concerned. We thought our school days were over. Sometime after that, a man came to our house and told us that we would be going to school in Hancock. He got all of our educational background and told us that a bus would be coming the next day to take us to school. Sure enough, the next morning the bus came, which was another new experience, and took all the Tenalloway kids to the school in town. I was placed in the 5th grade class taught by Miss Mabel Brooks. Although she was very stern, she was a good teacher. My problem was that I couldn't help comparing her with the gentle, soft-spoken teachers of the Schoolhouses school. End quote. I really enjoyed that story, and it's very unfortunate that the building burned down. And to this day, I can find no record of what caused the fire. However, afterwards, the charred school was actually somewhat reused and incorporated into a house. In the 1940s, the red brick house with the green dormer seen on the right here was constructed. Part of the Denali School's foundation was reused, and some of its brickwork as well. It was noted that the brick for the school was carried there from Hancock by mules, and that the process was so slow that they could only transport one load per day. Now, obviously, this house's floor plan is much smaller than that of the Denali School. Only sections of the schoolhouse foundation were reused. And despite this, it's still very interesting to me to see a vestige of this bygone schoolhouse still standing. Copies of the book Denali School are available for purchase at the Hancock Historical Society. I highly recommend it if you enjoy stories like the one I just shared. Now, just over Denali Hill, about 2 miles north of the Denali School, there stands one of the oldest schoolhouses west of Hancock. This is the first Shepherd's Schoolhouse, and it's located west of Hancock along the National Road's original line. It was originally constructed prior to 1845. This school has a complicated history, which I still struggle to understand. But what makes it truly unique is that a diary entry from an earlier teacher of the school has been recorded. And just a side note, the book in which this diary is found is on the back table. Firstly, let's take a look at this 1859 map, where the schoolhouse is labeled as being by a tract of land bequeathed to John Shepherd's heirs, hinting at its namesake. Other than the Carter Schoolhouse, which is not pictured here, this was really the only school building in our county at the time to be located west of Hancock. Back to the building here. From what I've pieced together, its stone foundation is likely all that remains of that pre-1845 schoolhouse. I believe that the school building suffered a fire in 1879, only leaving the foundation. Another school was constructed down the road to replace it, while someone built a home on the burnt school's foundation. This home suffered a fire yet again in the 1920s, which is when what you see here today was built. Following the first supposed fire, the schoolhouse which replaced this one is here. This was also named Shepherd's, and was located just down the road. Something interesting to note is that the spelling of Shepherd here shifted to having an H instead of a second P. This was also named Shepherd's, and it was built in 1879, and today it still stands. I believe that its original wooden siding is what's there today. It was very small compared to most of the schoolhouses of its time. It closed as a school around 1940 and is now somebody's home. It's really in a beautiful and tranquil location. Returning to the original Shepherd's Schoolhouse, the school building here is where the teacher who wrote about his time there in his diary would have taught. James Ridley Smith was one of Hancock's earliest citizens. He began teaching at Shepherd's Schoolhouse at the age of 23 in 1845. What I have on the screen now is about 6 mentions in his diary of his time teaching at the schoolhouse. I really find them fascinating, from the spelling of the words to the content of the writing. He firstly mentions commencing his school at Shepherd's and notes the significant snowfall, which apparently didn't stop him from getting to school. I also like how he mentions the good sleighing that he and his father did. I have found many instances in which sleighs were used to get to the school during times of snow, from those students and teachers. Mr. Smith also noted how he had as little as 8 students at a time, which wasn't very uncommon in the wintertime back then. It should also be noted how his rent for staying with somebody was nearly $1 a week. His only recorded entry from 1847 pertaining to the schoolhouse was this message, which I interpreted to be rather melancholy. It reads, "My time is up at Shepherd's Schoolhouse, taught 1.5 years." At that time, March was often the end of the school year. Mr. Smith wrote many other fascinating things in his diary, including his venture to the top of Big Round Top Mountain and his plunderings up there. He would continue to write in his diary up until his death in 1902. Although he did not fight in the Civil War, he wrote about it, and on that note, many Washington County schoolhouses have interesting connections to the Civil War. This third building in Bakersfield is definitely one of the oldest standing buildings in the county to have been used as a school. It was constructed in 1823 and was originally used as a church. In 1870, the children of Bakersfield needed the school, so it was used as a combination church and schoolhouse until the 1920s, when a brick church was built next door, and this stone building could be used exclusively as a schoolhouse, up until its closure in 1939. Now, it wasn't uncommon to find a building used as a school on the weekdays and as a church on Sunday. But what was uncommon was for two well-known presidents to visit a school. Both Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Roosevelt paid visits to the Bakersfield School. But why Bakersfield? Well, it was essentially the school's proximity to the Battle of Antietam in the Civil War. On October 3rd, 1862, less than 8 years before it commenced use as a school, Abraham Lincoln visited the Bakersfield building while he was evading encampments and field hospitals in the area. President Roosevelt was his next visitor. He was in the area for the 75th anniversary of the Battle of Antietam, and it is said that he either stopped or passed by the Bakersfield Schoolhouse. These were quite the important visitors for such a small school. Now here's a class photo of the schoolhouse. This is actually from the collection of the Smithsburg Museum of History. Some other historians who I've talked to have said that they find it interesting to try and spot the siblings in these class photos. Usually they'd be dressed in the same clothing. Maybe you all can see someone here. Now there are countless instances in which these schoolhouses in our county faced interactions with those fighting in the Civil War. When I was here in the Western Maryland room one day, I came across an interesting piece of writing from a Confederate soldier. Interestingly, this was written by a subject of General Lee on the retreat from Gettysburg. They had stayed at the White Oak Forest Schoolhouse, and for some strange reasons, spoke poorly of the people in the Philipsburg community. The date star on the left is from a private collection, but it's from the very schoolhouse mentioned in the writing. This was the first school in the Philipsburg community, which was to have been named after the old men who would sit on their porches on summer evenings, playing their fiddles. The White Oak Forest name is derived from a nearby plantation. Over time, the spelling of forest varied, and in some records it had one R, but in most it was spelled using two. Philipsburg is still a distinct community today, and is located by the YMCA just northeast of Hagerstown. This map was made by fellow historian Dennis Unger. On the right, you can see the original White Oak Forest Schoolhouse, where the encampment was. That building would precede two others, and in 1897, a new one would be built. At first, this was a one-room building, but a second room was added, and they were joined by that beautiful bell tower with arched vents, creating a very unique structure. By the 1920s, this building had aged, and it was reported that whenever they would blast at the nearby security quarry, the entire schoolhouse would shake. This building would be dismantled in 1924, and a two-room brick building would be constructed in its place. A.J. Clinkhart was the chief architect of all schools in Washington County from the 1910s to the 1930s. Here is an elevation drafted by him for the new White Oak Forest Schoolhouse. This building was, of course, considered state-of-the-art at the time of its construction. However, indoor plumbing still wasn't exactly customary at the time, and the school had an outhouse situated on the northeast corner of the property. Take note of this outhouse, as it will come into play later. Now, I've actually been fortunate enough to meet the owners of this school, and they related most of these stories to me, as well as showed my mother and I around the property. Now, I'm going to go on a brief foray here, but what I'm about to say will all make sense soon. I have an aunt who lives in California, and last year I had taken her up to Cascade to go on a hike to the falls, which was a significant tourist destination in the Victorian era. We were walking around the creek bed when I spotted a small marble amidst the thousands of fine pebbles in the dirt. Now, I love metal detecting and finding artifacts like this, and we were both just ecstatic about finding this marble. It was white and had beautiful red and black flecking to it. Now, I had been holding this marble for no more than 5 minutes, when tragically, it outslipped my grasp and fell into the creek. I was beyond distraught, to say the least. In the few minutes that I had had the marble, I had grown attached to it, and my aunt had too. We had already hypothesized who could have dropped it all those years ago, and how many years it might have spent in that creek bed, only for me to drop it again, much like its original owner must have done. Now, and bless her heart, my aunt joined me as I looked around on that creek bed on my hands and knees for almost an hour, until we finally gave up hope. You could say that we had really lost our marbles, as neither of us had ever managed to find where the marble had gone. We figured that it was simply destined to be in that creek, and it will likely be sitting there for at least another 100 years. Now, you're all probably wondering why I would tell such a seemingly unrelated story. Well, the wonderful family that now lives in the White Oak Forest Schoolhouse was at my last presentation, and one of their children came up to me and gifted to me none other than a marble. She said that her father had found it in their garden next to the schoolhouse, as well as a few other ones. Now, given my history with losing marbles, I made sure to be extra careful as to not let this one escape my clutch. I felt so honored to receive such a gift, and my life feels complete once again, now that I have a special marble for it. I can only imagine the games played with it by school children decades ago, and the disappointment they felt too when losing it. But now this beautiful marble, with hues of black, blue, and white, is mine, and I brought it here tonight so that all of you here in person can admire it. It's over on that Now here in this image, you all can see a class photo showing children sitting out in front of the building. One of them may have owned that very marble. Now moving on, the brick building we see today housed grades 1 through 6 at the time of it being a school. And this photo appears to show all of those grades together. You can see what more of the building looks like today in this then and out comparison. White Oak Forest was closed in 1961, and in the late 1960s, the person who owned it tried to convert it into office space. Which explains why on the front of the building, that addition was added to the left, and many of the original windows were sided over at the time as well. But anyways, those windows weren't the only things original to the school building. And my mother and I, we were shown to the basement, where something was written in the concrete floor. The owner said that the rest was hard to make out, but you can clearly see here how something has been written about Mrs. Miller, who was once a teacher at White Oak Forest. Apparently the rest of the writing is saying something rather derogatory about Mrs. Miller. Now you might be wondering why someone went to the bother of installing a concrete floor in the basement of this school. Well, they said that there was once a dentist's chair in the basement, and once every 6 months, the dentist would come by and examine all the students' teeth. Can you imagine that? And they poured concrete, specifically for that reason. And that isn't the only interesting story about this school, as many lifelong residents of the area recalled going to White Oak Forest when they were younger. One thing specifically remembered is that it didn't matter what you had to do. Whenever you used the school's outhouse, you were given just 2 pieces of toilet paper, no matter what. That outhouse is now gone, but the residents live to tell the story. At one point, God Loves Liquor Store hosted a sock hop at White Oak Forest, shortly after it stopped use as a school. They would party in the big open rooms and then drink whiskey outside. those were certainly different times. Now, remember how I mentioned architect A.J. Klinkert? I hope that as in this next school, you can see a trend in his designs. Some of these schools have been immensely difficult to track down, including the Denali School, which I discussed earlier. Another one of these would be Cushing School. Cushing School interested me because of its unique style. It was one of 2 brick buildings in the county which were considered state-of-the-art at the time of their construction, both being the last one of the schoolhouses to be built in Washington County. The other was Fountaindale, which was torn down and replaced in 1949. Schools constructed of brick seem to be the ones to really stand the test of time. And considering how Cushing's, built in 1932, was only 90 years old at the time I began to work for it, I thought that there was a pretty good chance that I could find it. Now, Cushing School ended up being the most difficult school in the county for me to find. I had no locational information to start off with, other than that it was near Yarlsburg and between that town and Weaverton, which only narrowed it down to about 10 square miles. The first step I took towards actually finding a school was to check the area I thought it to be in the 1877 Washington County Atlas. I found that there was a school for African Americans in the area, but other than that, the atlas gave me nothing. Something interesting I had found earlier is that the Cushing School was actually shown as a stone building earlier in history. The stone building was constructed around the year 1855. It was reportedly used as a field hospital in the Civil War. Many students recalled that the teacher would pretend to hear the groans of the soldiers who had been treated in the classroom in order to keep the students quiet. Now, of course, the next step I took for my research was to go to the vintageaerial.com website, where I browsed through years of farm survey pictures. I hadn't had much luck on topography maps, so this website was my best bet. Anyways, I was looking through a roll of photos taken in 1972 when this one caught my eye. It was a building very similar to the brick Cushing School, but with some slight modifications. Either way, I was positive that I had found it. But the catch was the exact locations of these aerial photos were never recorded. So I didn't have a precise location, but at least I knew that it was still there. Luckily, I had at least a general area where this photo was taken, so I looked around the place I was given on Google Maps, but to no avail. I ended up vastly expanding my search area, and eventually found it 2 miles away from where it was listed. My dad and I soon ventured out to the address I had discovered. It ended up being on Garrett's Mill Road, right between Yarlsburg and Weaverton, as I had previously thought. Now, Cushing School is mentioned in the newspaper various times, giving us some insight into its more recent renovations and how this brick building came to be. Many of Washington County's schoolhouses were auctioned off by the Board of Education after they were closed. The last day of school for students at Cushing's was in June of 1949. Later in November of that year, it is said that Cushing School had been sold to Calvin Trudeau for a bid of $2,000, which is about $25,000 in today's money. In an April 1950 newspaper article, it was said that the Trudeau family was renovating the former schoolhouse into their home. We now know that they closed in the windows and split the building into 2 stories. They also redid the brickwork on much of the building and added a front porch. But despite all of these changes, it still retains much of its original character. The former Cushing School stayed in the Trudeau family until the early 2000s, and their name is still on its mailbox, but the current owners still care for it greatly. You may remember how I said earlier that A.J. Klinkert designed many school buildings in the county. That building in the top right stood at Fountaindale before the current school was built, and interestingly, was almost identical to the Cushing Schoolhouse. Now you may remember the beginning of this presentation, where I said that our county's last tireless schoolhouse closed as recently as 1970. That was the Darden School in southern Washington County. I have seen countless community oppositions to school closures, but never one as significant as that of Dargan School. By the end of the 1969 to 1970 school year, the County Board of Education had voted to close the Dargan School and bus the remaining students to Sharpsburg. The community argued that they didn't want their children traveling over dangerous roads and that their community would lose itself. In the first week of the 1970 to 71 school year, parents of about 15 children took their kids to the steps of the Dargan Schoolhouse and held their own class there. Other oppositions included a man blocking the bus to Sharpsburg and blatant refusal to send their children to school. This tension eventually subsided, and the Dargan School was sold and forever closed by the end of 1970. That's quite an interesting story attached to our last two-room schoolhouse building here in Washington County. Next, I'll be moving on to the Western Reserve Schoolhouse. This is near Clear Spring, and I actually obtained this class photo through the building's current owner. A schoolhouse first stood at this location in 1851 when a frame building was constructed. The schoolhouse you see now was built in the 1880s, and I was able to speak to a man whose father had an interesting connection to the school. This man's father, whose last name was Holiday, was a student of the school in the years leading up to its closure. He was later bused to Searfoss. It was reported that the outhouse at the Western Reserve Schoolhouse was constructed by the CCC in the 1930s. Oftentimes, these outhouses are just demolished and forgotten about. However, this outhouse was utilized and still stands today. It was moved across the road into the backyard of this man's house. He said that his father converted it into a tool shed and that he changed the pitch of the roof as well. This man's grandfather took an interesting job too. He painted the exterior walls of schoolhouses, and he would often sleep overnight on the schoolhouse floors in the summertime and finish a job in the morning. That just seems like such a neat experience. Now you may have been wondering about the name Western Reserve, and I'm wondering too. I don't know where it came from, and I have a similar dilemma with the Shockey Station School. This school building stands surrounded by vast tracts of orchard land near Ringgold, just north of Smithsburg. Set above the current porch is this beautiful date stone that glistens in the sunlight today. Now, before I saw this in person, I only knew of the school as having a name referring to the Shockey family. This date stone brings a mystery, as I've never seen this school ever referred to as Mount Vernon, nor can I find any record of a nearby property or tract of land bearing the name. Now, interestingly, there's another historic schoolhouse just over the state line in Pennsylvania that was named none other than Mount Vernon School. However, I also do not know how this school got its name. There's a clipping from a website focusing on the genealogy of the Shockey family here. And you can see the station which gave the schoolhouse the name that I know it as. Now, going back to the other side of Washington County, this building, known as Ditto Schoolhouse, stands a few miles east of Hancock. And I actually found this by matching the mountains in the background from this photo. And here it is today. Obviously, it has undergone extensive renovations, but it's still recognizable, especially with the pitch of the roof and the positioning of the windows, as well as the little bits of the original stone foundation. Now, my father and I, we constantly go on drives out to these schoolhouses, as I'm always gathering information from the owners and taking new photos. And this was a late summer evening in August, and we went up to the door, and upon knocking on it, this older woman answered, and immediately, just after telling her why we were there, she let us in, and we sat down in her living room. And she had cookies prepared for us, and she wasn't even expecting us to be there. She was just very nice, And she told us that her name was Lola Miller, and that when she was a girl, she had gone to school there, where she lives today, and that her grandparents had gone to school both there and across Licking Creek. Now, she actually pulled this original photograph from the 1890s out of her purse wallet, and I just find that so interesting. Now, I do not know the exact date of this class photo, but I suspect that it was taken at the original school building. Interestingly, this image was titled Pectonville School, after the nearby town, which is another instance of ambiguity in these schoolhouses' names. Until the 1940s, the county only officially recognized these schoolhouses by their districts, meaning that schoolhouses would often garner multiple names. Miss Miller told us that the land for the schoolhouse had originally been deeded to the county by a man by the name of Mr. Ditto, and that he was the owner of all of the orchard land which once surrounded it. Now, this next schoolhouse actually appears in one of the books, which is also at that back table, and I find that it has a fascinating history. It's one of the oldest that still stands in our county today. Now, the Long Meadow Meeting House here is a building which many may not even notice when driving by. However, it is still one of the few log schoolhouses of our county that's still with us. The following was written about it by Judy Pierce, a fellow schoolhouse researcher. On the opposite side of the road from the later Martin Schoolhouse stands a long one-story wooden structure, Weatherby. This building is a landmark in the education history of the district. On March 2nd, 1811, Christian Good, John Moyer, and Jacob Lambert, trustees, met to select a lot of ground on the corner of Christian Good's plantation, on which they provided material and commenced the building. They agreed to finish with good and sufficient materials, the whole to be made with 2 good floors and well illuminated with glass windows, the room for a school to be furnished with a desk, 2 writing tables, with proper seats and a good stove. Additionally, there was also accommodation of a teacher and a family. They were also to be well furnished with a good stone chimney, door, and windows, etc. End quote. So this is a very unique situation in that one half of the building was essentially an apartment for the teacher who was living there or a family who wanted to rent it out. And this is actually found in another school building in the county, which I only recently discovered in Greensburg. Now, this building cost $322.96 to build. A subscription was necessary before the entire amount was provided for. The building was on the main road leading from Greencastle to Harmon's Gap, which is today Leonardsburg-Smithsburg Road, and this was once on the far edge of the Long Meadow plantation. The annual rental fee was 25 cents a year, which was paid probably until the death of Stephen Martin, who purchased the good farm in 1817. Thomas Smith was the teacher in 1819, and probably for some years prior to that date. He resided in the school building in the apartment. The last teacher who did so was probably Francis Schuss. This was in the far corner of the Long Meadow estate, and magnificently, this still stands today, despite being uncared for and heavily dilapidated. Next, this schoolhouse was another tricky one for me to find. It sits truly as far as in the middle of nowhere as you can get out by Clear Spring. There are truly no public roads that surround it. And last year, my father and I took another beautiful drive back to it. And on our way back there, we met 2 people, and we just greeted them and kept driving past. And eventually, we got to a stately brick house where we were again met by 2 others. And these people turned out to be the owners of the property. And this woman said that when she was a girl, she would play in this abandoned building, which was once owned by her grandparents. She said that in the 1940s, they had abandoned it, and that she remembered it being a square house. Now, this is all that's left of it today, and that big hole is a very ornate artisan well, I believe, that you can just fall into. And there are few remains of the schoolhouse left, but this is really the only significant wall that can still be seen. This woman led us back through the beautiful field. It's really just in this bucolic area with nothing else around. But a very interesting fact that she told us was that the bricks for both the schoolhouse and the stately home were made on the property. And I suspect that would have been around like the 1850s. And upon picking up one of the bricks, I found that it was very lightweight. And she told me that she had noticed this too. And at my last presentation, a man asked me if he thought that the school had collapsed because of the lightweight nature of the bricks. I thought that was a very interesting question, something to think about. But people were very interested in these, and I've actually brought one of the bricks from the schoolhouse here tonight. And I also have a regular brick for reference. So feel free to pick this up afterwards. Moving on, the situation with this schoolhouse is hard to explain. But originally, two school buildings stood here. The one on the left, which was constructed of brick, was for the white children of the community. And these two buildings were needed because of the growing population due to the Antietam Ironworks in the town. And the building on the right was for the African American children of the community. And it is said that they took that building on the right, lifted it up, and rotated it, and then added it on to the brick building, and giving us what we can see today. And they added a vestibule to connect the two. And I just thought that that was very useful for them, because back then they really wasted nothing, and if they already had a good school building, they weren't going to waste it. Now, I'm not sure exactly why they did this, but I suspect that it was following the consolidation movement. And next, I'd like to highlight another schoolhouse that is similar to Antietam Furnace in its architectural interest and one other respect. I've showcased a few stone schoolhouses tonight, and in this unique instance, a school is built right on top of a spring. This unique building is on Three Springs Farm, near Manor Church of the Brethren. Now, this school never had an official name, as it was mainly used for the children of Daniel Wolfe, who owned the tract of land deemed resurvey on Three Springs. On this land stood a large stone farmhouse, as well as a grand bank barn and some other outbuildings. Excluding the barn, most of the farm's original buildings have been beautifully restored and still stand today. And behind the large stone farmhouse, an odd one might catch your eye. This stone building was built over a spring, and the bottom portion is a spring house, while the second story was the schoolhouse. Along with the Wolf's children, the schoolhouse held other local children too. Something interesting to note is that Mr. Wolfe was known to keep slaves on his farm, but he would have them work there until they earned their purchase price, when he would then set them free. Some of these African American children were said to have attended the schoolhouse as well. Now, luckily, Three Springs Farm was acquired by the Browning family, who restored the schoolhouse to its original state, even furnishing it with period-accurate chairs at one time. I just love to hear preservation stories like that one, and I'd like to highlight an ongoing project happening elsewhere in the county. This is the schoolhouse at Fort Recker, and it was originally known simply as the Williams School, as it was operated by the Williams family. This photo shows it in 2020, which is when the Maryland Historical Trust focused in on the property and determined that a schoolhouse remained underneath all of these additions. It is just so nice to see these success stories. The schoolhouse will soon be open as a museum, with exhibits highlighting the Williams family at the fort. Now this next school will be special to me simply because of the hardship that I went through in finding it. The Wallace Schoolhouse was once listed as being in the Indian Spring District near Hancock. The schools west of Blair's Valley and the mountains of that area were never listed on topography maps, making it infinitely more difficult to locate schools in that part of the county. Now, I had had Wallace School in the back of my mind for a while. Ever since I saw this picture, I was intrigued, as it was one of those schools which is either very likely gone or impossible to find. So I didn't think much of it at first. But it was still worth a shot, because as with other schools, there's always that slim chance that it was still out there. Having the school survey picture was a relatively good start at finding it, because it gave me an idea of what to look for. A traditional 3-bay, 1-room frame schoolhouse. I really started looking for it in early April of 2023. And this was just when I had broken my elbow. So my father and I, we were driving around and my arm was in a sling, but we were still out there in the countryside going to all of these schoolhouses. And my only locational information was that it was east of Hancock and near the small community of Millstone. This was a small start, so I went to Google Maps and typed in Wellers. It showed me that there was a Weller Road in the exact area I knew. Since there was no street view, I tried my best to decipher the buildings on that road from above, but to no avail. This led me to believe that the school was gone, which was kind of expected. Feeling disappointed and having nowhere else to go, I started searching for photos of a different school. This other school is the tireless schoolhouse, which is also east of Hancock in the general vicinity of Wallace School. While on vintagearrow.com again, scrolling through 1980s farm survey pictures in hope of finding the O'Farrell School, I noticed a rather familiar building, which I soon recognized to be the Wallace Schoolhouse. I figured that if it was there in 1989, it would likely still be standing in 2023. So I looked up the place vintagearrow.com says it is, and I find it almost immediately. But of course, I had only aerial imagery, so I made plans to venture out to the area with my dad as a lead person. And on the last Saturday of April, we began driving out towards Hancock. I took photos of many schools along the way while knocking on doors and explaining what we were doing. After about 2 hours, we finally got en route to Wallace School. Eventually, we got off of Interstate 70 and took a scenic drive through some of the county's most beautiful mountain valleys. We passed old log houses, creeks, and an appetizing country market. We began our drive down Weller Road and eventually turned onto a smaller road called Maple Ridge. Just a few properties down lay a 1970s rancher, and right next to it was Wallace School. It was a beautiful sight to see. A small stream in front, a clear valley, and right in the middle, an old schoolhouse. We pulled into the driveway and met a man who was tending to a fire in the yard. He told us that the property had been with his family for more than 50 years, and that they did not know much about the school. I told him what we knew, and he explained to us that his son was actually the owner of the house, and that he would be there later if we'd like to talk to him. But in the meantime, he was kind enough to let us explore the old school. He pointed out the immaculate construction, and how all of the walls were still as straight as an arrow after more than a century. Walking inside, it was evident that there had been new walls framed in and added at one point. He said that his in-laws were using the schoolhouse as a home many years ago in the 1950s. But the original interior walls were what truly made the school special. As you can see here, there was all original plasterwork, as well as beadboard and some rickety stairs leading to the basement. On top of all of this, the chalkboards were still there at the back of the room. The man told us that his family wanted to get into contact with the Maryland Historical Trust to possibly receive a grant so they could try to restore the school building. Now, feeling content, we left the Wella School and went back to that country market we saw on the way there. If you'd like to go there, it's called Sandy Jack's Country Crossroads on Hollow Road, Hancock, and they have great food. Anyways, while we were waiting there, I browsed through newspapers.com and found some very interesting stories about Wella School. Apparently, the students were notoriously naughty and were always causing mischief. It was said that no teacher had lasted an entire year in that old mountain school. But this all changed when a woman by the name of Mary Steele came along. Miss Steele was a teacher at the Blair's Valley Schoolhouse, and wanting to change, she requested to be transferred to Wells. She had no idea what she was getting into. On her first day of teaching, she had recently gotten her driver's license. She had just gotten a nice new 1933 Ford as well. It turns out that after arriving at the school, some of the horrible kids had let the air out of her tires and stole all of her gas. She had to hitchhike home that day, though she was persistent and ended up teaching at Wells for 4 years. There's another story which said that the teacher's chair had been nailed to the ceiling at night. Multiple students were questioned, but the guilty party was never caught. Now, in my research, I've come across a few poems written about Washington County schoolhouses, either by old students or teachers. I particularly like this old poem, which was written by instructor Loretta Teach. Sunnyside School is now a house on Gruber Road near Clear Spring. It was sold at auction in 1940 for only $200, which is just shy of $4,400 today. Now here's the poem titled Sunnyside, which will be the last thing that I present to you all tonight. We wandered back to Sunnyside, not many miles away. Around the old schoolhouse door, the children were at play. But none were there that used to be, just 10 short years ago. Their faces all are missing, as the children come and go. And my heart is longing for my schoolmates kind and dear, and in my tender longing, their sweet voices I can hear. And the tender cord that bound us has us under apart, but the tender memories clinging leave their footprints in our hearts. The little brook still flows, so silently through the meadow. Upon its banks we spent many hours together. And at the foot of the hill stood Old Stone Mill. Many a happy hour was spent around the broken sill. The old mill wheel is silent, the miller's gone to rest, but the master still remaineth, teaching others what is best. Yes, the master still remaineth, giving others true advice, for to shun the wrong and defend the right. Now that will conclude tonight's presentation, and thank you all for listening. I will now accept any questions.
Could you talk a little about the album of school photographs you found at the Western Maryland Room?
Of course. So here in the Western Maryland Room, there is this phenomenal resource, and it is a collection of photographs, which was a school survey facilitated by Mr. George Bushy, who was a prominent citizen of Cavetown, and he was once on the Board of Education. And this has photos of almost every schoolhouse that existed in the county in the 1910s. And even if you're not this deep into it, it's still very interesting to look through, as it has some very neat and candid photos of life back then.
Did you encounter anything on Downs Hewitt? He's an administrator 15 years ago, and he did a lot of study on the old schools.
I don't
And
think I've
my
ever.
understanding, it was in the library at the Board of Education, but to clean that out. I don't know what happened to it.
What was his name?
Downs Hewitt.
No, I don't think so, but it is very unfortunate how some of the records from the Board of Education's library were removed, because there was a lot there,
Yes.
but it was all just taken away.
Henry, have you kept track of the hours that you have spent doing this?
No, I haven't. But I don't even think I can make an estimation. Countless hours.
Countless.
Are this all the schools, or these are the ones you've been to?
So this is just a select few. I've both been to more than this, and I've found far more than these. And this is only about 25, and about 110 still stay in our county today.
Yeah.
And of course, I wish I could present all of them, but we would be here all night.
Mainly because I was curious, I guess you've been to the one, I believe it's off of 67, there's like a small church there and right across, and it really sits on the road also, but it's completely refurbished and like a museum now. Are you familiar with what I'm sharing?
In Downsville?
60s. I came upon it by chance, and it was a couple of years ago. So I hate to tell you it's in that area. If I ever remember, I'll drop a note to you. But it's beautifully done. I mean, it's like a 2-room with a pot belly and the desks and everything. And then across it, I remember it's a church, small church. It's like a really wavy road. I don't think Shepherd Spring is it. Like I said, sorry, it's been a while.
That's okay. But yeah, it's really nice to see when some of these schoolhouses are not only converted into homes, but they're very thoughtfully renovated. Any other questions for tonight?
Have you done research on some of the other African American schools? You mentioned a few. I'm just curious.
Yeah, there are a few more. And I have those up here. But there's one I know of in Hancock. And when I went to the Historical Society there, this man running it, he just told us that it was the offices for a used car dealership. And so we just drove down there and found it. And I thought that was very strange that it was just, they're completely undocumented.
That's right on Main Street in Hancock, right?
Yeah.
Henry, in your forthcoming book, will you have text information like the kind you've given us tonight, as well as the photographs?
Yes.
Oh, good. We'll want a copy.
Of course. I'll make sure to make that public.
Yeah, autograph.
Autograph.
And will it be like these schools and others as well?
Yeah, so my book, I'm hoping to include every schoolhouse that has ever stood in our county. And it'll be hard to condense all of that, but I know.
That's why you make it a series. Hey, think of tomorrow. I'll be your business partner.
Yeah, I think I'll definitely have to separate schools in Hagerstown city limits and outside, because in Hagerstown there's just so much more to get into. And I think that the first volume, and maybe the only volume, will be ones outside of Hagerstown.
Want to talk about the list you have?
Yeah, so over here on our artifact table, there's a list of every schoolhouse that I know of that's currently standing in the county, and it's organized by district. So feel free to come up and pick up the bricks, look at the marble, and read the list.
So have you received any other marbles, or just that single one so far?
Just
Because I have a bunch of them that my son doesn't want anymore.
Thank you so much.